welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today, Josh and I are going to talk about the characteristics of what we'll call self-actualizers. So self-actualization is basically the process that we'll talk about today. It's very related to a theme that we discuss often on this show, which is about becoming the best player you can become. So if you think about that, we're actualizing our potential as tennis players, but it's also something, more generically that people do with their lives and try to self-actualize. So the concept comes from a humanistic psychologist named Abraham Maslow. Did a lot of his work in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And you may know that name from, I think his probably most notable work, Josh, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which has often been depicted in terms of like a pyramid. Maslow himself did not come up with the pyramid. It was actually the creation of a management consulting firm in the 60s. And essentially, the hierarchy of needs sees different needs that we have as human beings, some being foundational, all the way up to something like self-actualization, or really the highest level is something called transcendence, where you really kind of transcend the self and start looking at the world and society and culture as something that you want to be dedicating yourself to. But self-actualization, in order to get to transcendence, is a necessary part of the process. So maybe just a little background on the hierarchy of needs, just so we understand where self-actualization comes from. So it's basically broken down into these foundational or basic needs, which are physiological needs like food, water, warmth, being able to rest. Then safety needs, so security, safety. Then more into psychological needs, belonging, love, maybe also with your own esteem and self-image. And then lastly, more self-fulfillment, which is about self-actualization and then transcending the self. And the notion is that, in order to move to sort of higher needs in this kind of this diagram, is that other needs have to be satisfied first, or at least satisfied to a certain percentage before one can concentrate on that. So, if you're someone who doesn't have a home, is struggling to find food and water, you're not going to be able to work on self-actualization. You have to take care of those needs first. But we're going to assume that most of us listening here are in a position to work on ourselves, and we're using tennis really as a vehicle for working on self-actualization, to becoming that best tennis player we can become. In tandem, we can also be working on becoming the best people we can become. We've talked about how better people make better competitors. So in Maslow's work, he determined that there were 19 characteristics of self-actualizers. And so Josh and I, we took a look at the list of 19 characteristics. Won't go through the whole thing necessarily, but we picked ones that we thought were particularly relevant to tennis players and specifically our audience. So our goal today is to talk about some of the ones that we thought were important in self-actualization and bring it back to how are we working on these things as tennis players and how we're actualizing ourselves to become the best players, best competitors that we can become. So Josh, let's start off with your first characteristic of self-actualizers that you thought was very relevant to tennis players.
Yeah, so the first characteristic that I selected is perception of reality, and I can just read sort of a short description of it, and then we could discuss it a little bit. So perception of reality, which is that these individuals tend to have a superior relationship with reality and are generally unthreatened and unfrightened by the unknown. In fact, they accept it, are comfortable with it, and often are even more attracted by it than the known. Sorry, but more attracted by it than by the known. They not only tolerate the ambiguous and unstructured, they like it. And I picked this one because as a tennis player, particularly in competition, particularly in matches, there is a lot of unknown. You know, we could start with what's the end result of the match going to be today? Am I going to win or lose? How am I going to play? Who am I going to play? Which might be a question, right? Might be known. How are they going to play? How are they going to act? How's the weather going to be? Am I going to get lucky or unlucky out there? How are my opponent's line calls going to be? There's endless unknown in any time you enter a tennis court, right? There's also other things that can happen, right? There's injuries, there's disputes, there's, frustration, there's anxiety, there's all sorts of different things that can happen whenever you step onto the court. And that unknown can be really, really frightening, can cause people to not want to enter the court in the first place, can be intimidating. So what I like about this characteristic is that it emphasizes the embrace of that unknown, right? It's that the embrace of it and sort of the wholehearted, not just acceptance and embrace, but really excitement for the unknown, right? The fact that they prefer it. They prefer those unknown, ambiguous, unstructured situations that, that's what excites these sorts of people. And I think that, yeah, especially if we're thinking about, let's say, a tournament, right, where you're there for often multiple days, multiple matches. Weather can change. You're playing different types of people, different personalities, different playing styles, all of the above. In order to be successful, I would say both in a tournament and long term in tennis, the ability to really embrace and be excited about that sort of chaotic situation, I think is really critical. Um, you know, I think for anybody that grew up playing junior tennis and has seen some of the chaos that can take place in a junior tennis tournament, as well as different things that can happen in adult tennis as well. Um, the ability to handle those sorts of chaotic, sort of unstructured moments, I think is really essential. So when I read that characteristic on the list, it definitely resonated with me, and I think it's up there with one of the most essential characteristics.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think as you were speaking, Josh, a couple things came to mind. One was like, can we be more excited about the fact that we don't know who's going to win and know that we have a chance as opposed to being pessimistic about that? So embracing the uncertainty and making that, an exciting part of why we play tennis. It also made me think about having, really grounded perspectives on life. So like that life is hard. Like a tennis match is hard. It's not easy. It's not going to be smooth. It's often not fair, but that's how it is. So you have to have that perception of reality. And then lastly, it made me think about the Stockdale paradox, which is, yeah, we want to believe we can do well, but this is probably going to be harder and probably will take longer than we think. And so I think when we have these more grounded perceptions of how reality works, it actually makes it easier to deal with some of these things in a match because you expected it. You expected this to be a hard fought match or struggle. You expected that something unfair might pop up. You expected that, maybe over the course of your career, yes, you want to really improve, but sometimes it takes longer than you would like, and so I think the more that we work on our perception of reality and have very solid perspectives on how it actually works is super, super helpful. So
Could I actually just add one thing to that,
absolutely. Yeah.
which came to my mind? So there's a newsletter that I subscribe to from a guy named Sahil Bloom, and he had a recent newsletter that was called the New Opportunity Test, where he talks about this idea of being able to make decisions and potentially say no to things and really just decide if something is the right opportunity for you. And he has this little chart to make a decision. And essentially, if it's sort of like a flow chart where if the answer is yes, you continue. If the answer is no, then the answer is no. And so there are three questions ultimately. The first is, does this fall within my list of professional priorities? Yes or no. So if no, okay, that's not the right thing for me. Is this a hell yeah opportunity? That's the second one. And then assume this will take twice as long and be half as rewarding. Would you still do it? Right? Sort of with that related to that Stockdale paradox that you just brought up, that, things often are harder than we think that they're going to be. So can we be realistic? Can we expect that? And can we sort of factor that into to our decision making process ultimately as well? So that just sort of that newsletter just came out a few days ago, and I think definitely related to relates to that idea from the Stockdale paradox. So I just thought that was interesting as
Yeah,
well.
no, that last question especially kind of gets at that because yeah, we don't really know what will happen, and it probably will be tough to get there,
Yep.
right? Um, so before we proceed on to the next characteristic, we want to talk about or take a moment here to talk about a new sponsor of the podcast, Go Sport. So GEAU Sport. Now, if you've been a regular listener to the show, you know that Josh and we haven't had any sponsors or ads in the past, and we've had some opportunities, but nothing really resonated or felt very authentic. But that was different when we met Chris from Go Sport. Now, Chris is a tennis player. He played a lot, I believe, as a junior. He's come back to the sport now, and he listens to the podcast, and we just felt a real synergy between us. Sort of the origin stories of his company and our podcast definitely had some parallels. So, just to talk a little bit more about Go Sport. So it's a family-owned business based in the U.S. They specialize entirely on gear bags, so racket bags, duffel bags, backpacks. And these products, all these bags are made with premium fabrics, premium materials, really the same materials used in high-end outdoor products. And they're designed to last for years. So if you've used tennis bags, maybe the length of the shelf life of your bag, who knows how good it's been. And if you're a player for many years, you've probably had many, many bags. But these are rigorously tested so that they satisfy, the user, the owner, and they're designed to last for a long time. So, if your player is looking for more from your bag, you should check out the Axiom series of bags from Go Sport. They're specifically designed to allow for customization. They have dividers, they have little modular designs, as well as, lots of pockets and compartments for all of your belongings. And as a Tennis IQ podcast listener, you can enjoy a 10% discount on Go Sport products by using the code TennisIQ10 when shopping at gosport.com. So gosport.com is GEAU sport.com. The discount code is TennisIQ10. We'll put that in the show notes. So please visit gosport.com today and take a look at their great bags. All right, Josh. So I'm going to come back to the first characteristic I want to talk about, which is solitude. And, not everybody likes being alone. But again, let's read what Maslow had to say about solitude. So he said, self-actualizing individuals positively like solitude and privacy to a definitely greater degree than the average person. And, when we were talking about this one earlier, you brought up the fact that, hey, tennis can be a very lonely sport, especially if you're playing singles. And even when you're playing doubles, not all of us are the best teammates. Sometimes you feel a little bit alone out there as well. You can't be subbed out. It's all on you. So there is a level of solitude that we have to be comfortable with in the sport. And when I talk to players about, especially young players, why did you choose tennis versus, say, a team sport? And I'd say 80+% of them refer to the fact that they like being there by themselves and figuring things out. That to me is a sign that, they're okay with solitude. They're okay with being out there by themselves, being responsible for what's going on. Um, and I took it in one more step further, Josh, in that I think a lot of tennis players or a lot of self-actualizers are also they're deep thinkers, they're introspective, they think about what they've done and how they could make it better in the future. And I think one has to be comfortable with one's own thoughts and taking some solitude to go through that process. So when we think about having a player use a training journal, that's that is a kind of a solo activity that gives them the ability to look within and figure things out, learn, maybe develop some insight, and then move forward. But I think the nature of the sport is one of solitude, but to become truly your best at this sport, you have to have a somewhat introspective process that allows you to look within and be comfortable with that. Not have to feel like you always need to be around others or hear other people tell you what needs to be done. I mean, that's certainly part of the process too, right? Getting feedback from a coach or a trusted advisor. But ultimately, we have to really look within ourselves and be comfortable with that as a part of the process. So I'm curious if you had some additional thoughts on solitude.
Yeah, and it actually got me thinking about the Andre Agassi quote from his book Open, where, and I actually have the quote here, which is, "In tennis, you're on an island. Of all the games men and women play, tennis is the closest to solitary confinement, which inevitably leads to self-talk. And for me, the self-talk starts here in the afternoon shower. This is when I begin to say things to myself, crazy things over and over again until I believe them." But that sort of beginning piece where he says, "Hey, it's just you out there. You're on an island. It's he calls it solitary confinement." And yes, it's not like that 100% of the time. Yes, people play doubles. Yes, there's certain situations where there's opportunities for coaching, and we see that now on the pro tours. College tennis, there's opportunities for coaching. Um, in junior tennis, sometimes, and there's opportunities as well during set breaks or things like that. But in general, especially in singles, it's just the player. So the you know it, like that first characteristic of really really embracing, really being comfortable with the unknown. It's about really embracing and really being comfortable with it just being you out there, right? As you said, Brian, a lot of players like the sport and get into the sport because of that individual nature, right? They like that problem solving piece, just like you mentioned, but I think there's something else. They can take on the responsibility of winning or losing a match, right? Where if you're in a team sport, you can certainly impact and play a role in your team's success, but it's different. You can play amazing and your team can lose and vice versa. And tennis is really a sport where based on the results of how you play and how your opponent plays, you get a result. And I think that that's appealing to a lot of people, especially a lot of people who have experience with team sports, who maybe had frustrations in some points where, where they felt like they were doing everything that they can and maybe teammates weren't, or they weren't getting the results that they wanted at a team level. So I think, being able to fully embrace that aspect of the sport, that solitude aspect, that individual aspect, um, is really critical because you're out there by yourself and you're out there by yourself for a long time, right? As we all know, tennis matches can last for hours, and it's about being able to be out there and handle everything that you might handle out there by yourself ultimately, right? The ups and downs, the bad breaks, the maybe moments where you're playing great and moments where you're not playing as great, right? That sort of roller coaster of of emotions, of events, of circumstances, of all of the above, and be able to handle it by yourself, which which obviously has a lot to do with mental toughness and with the different aspects of sports psychology that we discuss here. Because it's about who can handle those emotions better, who can handle pressure better, who can stay focused both in the short term within a point, but also long term over long spans of time. Um, I think the the individual aspect of the sport makes it challenging and really makes it critical to have some of these different mental skills and tools, but is also appealing for that same reason to people that are drawn to the sport. So I think the more that we can be excited about that aspect of things rather than um, come to resent it, the better that's going to end up serving us going forward.
That kind of goes a little bit with the perception of reality. That's the reality of the sport. I would say kind of more outside of the court though, the players who've done best with me that I've worked with have been the ones who have been willing to go deeper off the court, to spend some time with themselves, try to gain some insight into who they are and what they're experiencing on the court, whether that's journaling or talking things through. And I'm, now the more I think about it, the ones who really have done the best are the ones who are not afraid to journal and write about their experiences. And, that takes some time. That takes the willingness to be by yourself with your thoughts and really understand, okay, what's happening? What's important to me? Where do I want to go with this? What am I learning out here? How can I now move forward to the next step? And again, the goal is always to become the best player you can become. So the reality is you probably have to spend some time by yourself off the court, after matches, after training, and figure out what's really going on. To me, that is kind of like an exponential thing, Josh, with growth. If you can spend that time and do it consistently, how can you not learn and improve more? And the same with even before training or matches, spending that time by yourself, writing out your game plan or your goals. Very similar to like what Dominic Arbati talked about in our episode. Like he said, like it wasn't the on-court performance that all of a sudden got so much better or he got so much stronger. It was really that pre-match time and post-match time that made his mental game and his brain stronger. That was the difference. And that a lot of that is being comfortable with yourself and your thoughts. So, all right. What is your next characteristic, Josh?
All right. So my next characteristic, which is actually related to that piece of that piece of solitude, but I think it has some different elements as well, is autonomy. And that is, people that have uh, become strong enough to be independent of the good opinion of other people or even of their affection. The honors, the status, the rewards, the popularity, the prestige, and the love that they can bestow must have become less important than self-development and inner growth. So I really like this because it really emphasizes the ability to choose, right? The ability to choose, which is what autonomy really relates to, but the ability to choose what to care about, right? Are we caring more about what other people think and their opinions, their affection, their status, things like that, or are we caring more about what we really value, what we think is right? And I think that's really critical, right? We've talked endlessly on this podcast about sort of the opinions of other people. We've talked about the things like UTR and results and rankings and things like that. That I think a big portion of why people care about those so much is because it's public. It's what other people maybe are seeing and thinking about, or at least that's what we perceive. And I think this ability to detach from that and not focus so much on what other people are thinking, not focus so much on what other people might be saying or might be thinking behind your back, which, by the way, they're probably not nearly as much as we think that they are. And really focus on ourselves, focus on becoming the best version of ourselves, focus on, our values, you know, our what we really feel is important, and trying to become that best version of ourselves, and choosing to focus on that rather than that other piece. There's a something called the spotlight effect, where people assume that they are, that just because we think about ourselves a lot, that other people must also be thinking about us just as much, right? We must be in the spotlight of other people's heads. But really that's not true. Um, you know, we're thinking about ourselves a lot, and other people are thinking about themselves a lot. And they, just like we don't spend a lot of our time thinking about them, they don't spend that much time thinking about us either. Um, which I think is something that a lot of people intuitively recognize, but actually understanding that in the moment, I think can be a real challenge. I sometimes refer to that, especially with younger athletes that I work with, as sort of the main character effect, where everyone kind of thinks of themselves as the main character in the story because you're the main character in your story. But I think when we can recognize that maybe you're not the main character in everybody's story, and not everybody is thinking about you, in that same way or as often as you assume that they are, it's a little bit easier to detach from the perceived, thoughts and judgments of other people. So I think that autonomy piece and being able to separate from that is really critical.
For sure. And I think there's another characteristic in the list that I think, as we were talking, we felt like was almost a sub characteristic of this one, which is called resistance to enculturation. You use the word detach, which is really in the definition of this. So it says, for self-actualizers, of all of them, it may be said that in a certain profound and meaningful sense, they resist enculturation and maintain a certain inner detachment from the culture in which they are immersed. So, what, again, this is autonomy and choice, but we know that there's a certain culture in tennis around things like winning, rankings, ratings. And for the most part, most people are completely wrong about those things. And you have to be willing to detach yourself from the prevailing culture of like, oh, you have to win, you have to beat this person, this is a must win. Really using sort of the language of demands, and be able to detach from that and understand that no, that's not right. That's not really how it works. That's not the path to me becoming my best. And in fact, that's probably the path to me falling short of who I could have been if I'm so focused on ratings, rankings, and winning at all costs. And so we have to be able to resist that. We have to be able to detach that from what the majority thinks, and understand that they actually don't understand how competition and challenges and self-actualization and becoming the best player really works. But it's so out there, right? It's not only in our tennis culture, but it's in the sports media. You hear about it in other sports as well. And it takes a lot of courage to detach from that, to say, no, I'm gonna choose my path to where I want to go. And it's gonna be my own authentic path. And I'm gonna figure out my authentic way of playing this game. And we'll see where that turns out. But I'm not gonna just do something because somebody else thinks I should, or the vast majority of people believe that this is the only way to do something. And this kind of reminded me of a story of a student I work with. She's actually a figure skater, and she's a freshman in college this year. And she has this roommate who's also a freshman. And the roommate is a pre-med student, and her parents are clearly very type A, very pushy, demanding. And so her roommate is telling her, like, you have to get involved in this. You have to be able to do this. You have to go to this career fair. You have to do all these. You have to get an internship. And she's using all this like, you have to, you have to, you have to. And So the student that I work with, and she's a little bit skeptical. It's like, I don't really know that I have to do these things. And so she had a chat with her academic advisor. And I loved the advice that her academic advisor gave her. She said, don't listen, don't take career advice from someone who's never had a career. And we kind of do that a lot in tennis. We listen to parents who've never raised a top 10 elite player before. Guess what? You're the first one. They're rookies. They don't know really what they're doing. And the same with a lot of coaches. So it's okay to say, I'm going to pick my path. It's okay to say, yeah, you who have never won anything should stop probably talking about winning so much. Maybe that's why you're not winning that much. But it takes, again, a lot of guts to fight back against this very conventional way of talking about the sport, talking about the necessity of winning, the necessity of improving your ratings or your rankings. So it just takes a lot of courage, and you have to have, of course, that autonomy to make that choice. Any last thoughts, Josh, on autonomy?
I like that story. I think it's interesting, even the way that those sorts of expectations were phrased, right? You have to do this, you have to do that. And I think that's, that those ways of, we hear this a lot when people talk to themselves, right? You have to win this next point. You should, you're supposed to, you need to, you must. And I think people will say that to themselves. People will say that to other people. I think parents or coaches will often say that to players. And then that gets internalized. And then what do you know? That they end up using that with other people. And I think often when looked under the microscope, when you ask somebody, hey, well, what's the impact of you saying some of these things to yourself, right? That you have to win this next point. You have to win. I'm playing somebody who's one UTR point lower than me, so I have to beat them 6-love, 6-love, right? Well, if I'm telling myself that, what's the impact? Am I gonna be relaxed out there? Am I gonna be tense and nervous? What do you think that's gonna end up doing? And I think people tend to recognize that, okay, that probably doesn't help. I'm probably gonna end up playing really tight, scared, nervous about losing a game or losing the match. And what do you know? I'm not going to play well. I'm not going to be more likely to do those things that I feel like I must or need to do. So I think, yeah, even just the way that was phrased, I think is really interesting and telling, because I think that those internalized things that are maybe said to us are things we end up saying to ourselves and end up projecting onto other people as well.
Yeah, and we probably don't even realize when we're adopting that language of like how it's affecting us and others.
Yep.
So the next characteristic I wanted to talk about was something called fresh appreciation. So self-actualizing people have the wonderful capacity to appreciate again and again, freshly and naively, the basic goods of life with awe, pleasure, wonder, and even ecstasy. However stale these experiences may have become to others. And I really like this one, Josh, because it's like, I think you said it earlier in our pre-show prep, like bringing fresh eyes to everything. It's a new day. It's another opportunity to go out on the court. Yeah, of course, we're probably going to do things we did yesterday or last week. Certain aspects of tennis could be repetitive, but the ability to bring sort of a fresh perspective, to bring a learning perspective, to bring enjoyment and enthusiasm to what you're doing can only help you become better and better. And so this made me think also about our definition of what it means to be competitive, which, priority one is that you enjoy competing. So when we think about fresh appreciation, to me, that's about bringing more joy, more enjoyment, more enthusiasm to what you're doing. That's naturally going to have an impact on your staying power in the sport, in a match when things do get tough. It's going to have an impact on how you perceive challenges in the sport, not so much as a threat, but more like, no, I love the battle. This is why I'm here. I love having these tough matches and seeing what can happen, win or lose, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. Bob Littman was telling us, a story about how he was playing a guy who I think he had beaten several times in the past, but this guy got him on a particular day, and Bob expressed some happiness for his opponent that he had, made a breakthrough on that. And that's really kind of the true fellowship of competition that ultimately makes us better, right? Bob didn't look at this as something to be sad or disappointed about or tragic. He just saw this as another experience, and he'll build off of that. He can actually learn from that better with that kind of attitude. So I think if we can approach our daily practice, our daily training, even though there are going to be mundane aspects to it, can you go out on the court with a joy, gratitude, appreciation for what you're doing? Can you put more into that cross-court forehand drill or cross-court backhand or mini tennis such that, yeah, you're focusing on loving that you're on the court. You're appreciating the fact that you can move and play well and be here and do something that you love. You'll get so much more, I think, also, Josh, out of those kind of little repetitive things when you bring sort of fresh appreciation to it. It's very easy, if you go to any sort of team practice or an academy practice and you watch how people perform in mini tennis, you'll see a lot of slow feet. People just sort of not moving very much and it's kind of very casual. It almost defeats the purpose of like why we're doing it. But if you can bring some real energy and enthusiasm to it, bring some excellence to these little things, bring some excellence to your cross-court ground strokes and whatever else it is, you're just going to feel so much more engaged. You're going to appreciate what you're doing so much more. And as we know from Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, one of the major reasons that they stayed around so long is that they just loved what they were doing. They enjoyed what they were doing. Rafa there's a video that Nadal Academy put out about, the mental work and how it's, the mental work is not complaining about how you feel, how you're playing. And instead it's really changing your attitude and then practicing with passion. And I think that's what this is about, right? It's practice with passion, bring a fresh appreciation to the court every single day. And again, this is another thing. How can you not improve when this is what you're doing when you step on the court to train?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to me, it reminds me of, of a couple different things, right? I mean, first, this idea of trying to approach something as if it will be either the first time or last time that you'll ever do it, as if it's the first time you've done something or if it will be the last time you ever do something, right? Where it's easy to go in and sort of take something for granted, maybe go through the motions, say, oh, this is just another day of practice. But what if this was the first time that you ever played this sport, right? You would be surprised by the way that the ball bounced and in awe at, you being able to make the ball over the net, and then in awe by some of the shots that you're able to hit and enjoying running after the ball and things like that. As when people tend to start a sport, though, that's the experience that they have, right? They love running after the ball. They like being with their friends. So I think if we can connect to that as if it's the first time we approach something, or right, if it's the last time, hey, if this is the last time you're ever going to play tennis or the last time you ever could play, and ultimately, none of us know what the future brings or what life ends up bringing. So if we can approach something and think about, hey, well, if this really was the last time I could ever play this sport, this session that I'm in right now, okay, I would probably really try to take it all in. I would really try to be present. I would really try to enjoy it. I would really try to do my best every point, even if maybe I wasn't playing amazing on that particular day. So I think if we can approach it thinking about if it's the first or last time that we ever do something, I think that can definitely be helpful. And then also there's this concept of beginner's mind, right? If we can go in and not feel like we're the expert on something, not bring all our preconceived notions and judgments from the past, but just go in with sort of fresh eyes and, have that sort of mindset of a beginner and just try to take it all in, not feel like we know everything, feel like there's something to learn every single day that we're out there, from whoever we're with. I think we tend to get the most out of that experience as well.
Absolutely. So that's good stuff. So let's do one more. Josh, I think you have one more that you thought was very interesting.
Yes, and it's actually sort of two concepts combined, which I think are related but have different elements to them. So the first is ethics, and ethics is, people they do right and do not do wrong. Needless to say, their notions of right and wrong and of good and evil are often not the conventional ones. So they're not necessarily, you know, abiding by just the conventional um, expectations of maybe society and of of what they're supposed to do in that way, but they have a strong ethical system that they've built that, and they're really clear about what is right and what is wrong for them, and they're able to abide by that. And we can see that in a tennis match, right? In terms of line calls and sportsmanship and things like that. But I think it also relates to somebody's training, right? Are they doing what I think somebody's ethics could have to do with, hey, I want to treat all the people around me with respect during training, right? That could be my coaches, that could be parents, that could be other players, that could be whoever, right? So if that is part of my ethics, then it doesn't matter if I'm playing poorly on a particular day, I'm still treating those people around me with respect. That is still part of my ethical system. That is still part of what I believe in. So I think being really clear about that, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean that my ethics need to be the same as the people around me, but it means that we want to be as crystal clear on that as possible. And then the second characteristic, which I think is related to this, is values, which is a firm foundation for a value system is automatically furnished to self-actualizers by their philosophic acceptance of the nature of self, of human nature, of much of social life, and of nature and physical reality. And I think this relates to that first piece of ethics, where I think if we can really do the work and really do that work related to values, really decide what is most important to us, what are those main pieces that we really care about, that we really find to be most critical, then it's easier to sort of live and abide by that system, by those ethics, by those values that we truly care about. And again, that doesn't, just like that first piece of ethics, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same as those around us. So yeah, and I think, as we work to be the best players that we can be, um, I think being really clear about our values and ethics and really living by those on a day-to-day basis, both in training, competition, and off the court, helps us to be the best people that we can be, and which ultimately leads to the best, us being the best players that we can be. So I like those two concepts a lot, and sort of like the link between the two as well.
I'm really glad you chose that. I mean, we have talked a lot about this, but I want to maybe bring some more importance to it, Josh, because, even recently I've heard a lot of stories about coaches coaching their players to cheat. So one comes from, a college player in an individual tournament in the fall and overhearing his opponent's coach tell him, let's change the score in this game at some
Wow.
point. Now, and fortunately, the guy I work with, he heard it. He was able to bring it up. And apparently the guy had done the exact same thing the day before. And he got away with it. But he didn't get away with it this time because the umpire was the same umpire and he was sort of becoming wise to this strategy. Same with some of the kids who I work with who are in Florida at tournaments. They're often hearing coaches telling their players, make bad calls as a means of getting into your opponent's head. And so I think, with ethics and values, the real challenge is winning more important to you than your character? And unknowingly, there might be some people out there teaching that, yes, it is. But in the end, that kind of behavior is really a shortcut. It's a shortcut to a win today, but it doesn't teach you how to withstand reality, the reality that things are hard. And you're going to reach a point at some time in your career where maybe you don't have the ability to change the score or take a line call. Maybe there's a line call system. Maybe there's somebody keeping score. All of a sudden, your strategy for getting free points is now gone. And you get yourself in a tough situation. What are you going to do? So I think it's really important as people work with coaches, as they work with young players, that a win today is not worth you sacrificing your values and your character. Tennis should be a sport and an arena in which we build a very strong, functional person who can operate well in the world. And one of my favorite topics in psychology and sports psychology, we don't talk about this much, but it's something called moral functioning and models of moral functioning. And tennis is a great place to practice something like that, in which we want to be the ones who are always doing something right. We want to be the model and showing other people how they ought to behave in these situations. And as you said, Josh, that will often be in conflict with how others act, like these other coaches, or even I think it's pretty common in college tennis that if somebody makes a bad call on you, you hook them back. Okay, that may work, and I'm saying it, and I'm not saying that it doesn't, but you're a cheater too. Is
Just
again,
because they cheated first doesn't mean that your cheating is acceptable.
that's right. I mean, at 5 years old, that sort of may be a valid excuse, but you're not five anymore.
They started it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they started it, and you still hear that, but you can overcome it. The way you become a stronger person is you deal with that reality, and you move through it. So I think this is a really important topic, and I hope that this can connect with coaches and parents, that you're actually harming your players when you have them aspire to kind of a lower moral code, a lower set of ethics. In the end, that will backfire in their career, whether that be in tennis or some other aspect of life. They won't have become necessarily the person that they could have become, or the player they could have become. And this, again, I'll go back to like the players who I've worked with, who I think have been the most successful. They have all had really strong moral compasses on this topic, to the point like where they said, I hate cheaters, hate people who do that. And they've been involved for college teams, junior tennis, pro tennis. So they've seen it all. And they just have this really strong sense of ethics. And again, I think that's what makes them different, is that their inner fortress of mental toughness is really, really strong, and they know what's important to them. So do you have any last words, Josh, for us on ethics, values?
Yeah, couple things. I think that one of the things that tends to lead to cheating and just people acting in that way, whether it's as you said, we see it at different levels. We see it in college tennis, we see it in junior tennis, in adult tennis, right? And in pro tennis, even we see it in other ways, right? Even though there's obviously an umpire and often electronic line calling, there's sometimes there's a question of whether somebody um let's say they're at the net. The question is whether they made contact with the ball, or whether they um, reached the ball with their racket before that second bounce. There's things like that where there are ethical questions. It does uh, often fall on the player to whether they admit to it or not. And again, the ethical piece comes up. Um, but what I think tends to lead to a lot of that is the overvaluing of each match and feeling like, okay, this match in front of me, this match that I'm playing today, this match that I'm playing right now is so important. Everything comes down to this. I need to win this match. I have to win this match. And by thinking that way, I think that leads to people taking shortcuts and cutting corners and cheating and doing things ethically that they shouldn't. And I think if we can zoom out, if we can take more of a long-term approach, if we can understand that the whole point of this is to become the best player that we can be, and competition helps us become the best player that we can be over time, and that no one match is maybe as important as we make it out to be in our heads, then we can recognize that each match is not important as kind of like what you said, not important enough to lose our um it's not more important than our ethics. That's for sure. And I think also, this idea of everything is practice, which is an idea that we talked about in a previous episode with Christina Rollo and Dave DeHaan, where I think Christina brought that up, that, we can go in with this approach that every time we're on the court, this is practice. This is practice for me becoming the best player that I can be, right? And Nadal has said that on days where he's not playing at his best, okay, this is practice for him to handle his emotions and to still have good body language and to still try to do his best on those days. Because guess what? Just like that, there's days like that at practice. There's going to be days like that during matches. And if you can put in the work to practice that, then you're setting yourself up for your future. You're ultimately practicing for your future. And I think the same could be true of on moments where somebody makes poor line calls against you, right? That is practice for how you're going to handle that in the future. If you stoop to their level, then you're simply casting a vote, we could say, for acting in that way in the future as well, rather than this being practice for other situations where I'm going to get bad line calls and I want to be above that. Again, if just because they made the bad line call first, if I start doing the same thing, then we're both cheaters. We're both making bad line calls. It doesn't matter who did it first, ultimately. And then lastly, tennis is in a lot of ways unique, that you do have to be your own umpire, right? You do have to be your own umpire out there, which is a lot of responsibility. And I think there's a lot that can be learned in a positive way from that, right? In terms of what's right and what's wrong, how you want to conduct yourself when maybe the opponent's not going to know if the shot ultimately bounced twice or if it was ultimately an inch in or an inch or hit the line. But I think there is the potential to really learn a lot ethically from that you can apply to other areas of life. But I think unfortunately people take the wrong lesson from that and do whatever is needed to win, and sort of cut corners and betray their ethics along the way. So I think that last piece of sort of the ethics and value is really critical from both a performance standpoint and just a standpoint of, not just trying to be the best tennis player you can be, which is certainly a big part of our goal here, but being the best person you can be.
Yeah, and self-actualizing. So this has been a really great conversation, Josh. If people are interested in learning more about Abraham Maslow, self-actualization, a couple of books, Motivation and Personality by Maslow. There's a specific chapter actually there about self-actualizing people. And a more recent book by psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman called Transcend. He actually was able to get access to some previously unpublished notes of Abraham Maslow. And that book gets a lot more into the last stage of transcendence. So very enjoyable book, and would really encourage people to look at both of those if they're interested in more on self-actualization. So, well, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, and you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.